right. Well, appreciate everybody being here. So good morning and welcome to the First Amendment Month panel titled Voices During a Pandemic. It's hosted by the Society of Professional Journalists, the chapter at EKU. My name is Zach Combest and I'm the SPJ President and Editor-in-Chief of the Eastern Progress. During this panel discussion, our panelists will be addressing topics surrounding the First Amendment, and when it comes to the election, protesting and social justice, freedom of speech and censorship, and advice for future journalists. So now I have the honor of introducing our panelists. First, we have Taylor Six, a reporter from the Richmond Register. Taylor is a 2018 graduate of EKU and was the news editor for the Eastern Progress. Next, we have BEM professor, Dr. Ginny Whitehouse. Dr. Whitehouse expert areas are in journalism, media law, and media ethics. And then finally, we have Professor Michael Randolph. Michael Randolph is senior lecturer in the Department of Communication, where his expert areas are in broadcasting and film studies. So thank you guys for joining me today. We have exciting stuff going on. So before we start this panel, just a couple of housekeeping things. First, for the students on Zoom, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat, or you can ask questions at the end. But besides that, make sure your mics are muted so we can hear the panelists. So while we get started, let's start with the first question right here for our panel. So it comes from the SPJ chapter. So over the summer and for a large portion of 2020, the social justice and Black Lives Matter protests and marches moved across the country from different cities. So how well do you think the media outlets covered these movements while also dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic? And any of the panelists can start.
This is me, himself. The challenge is not that there was a problem covering it. The problem is depending on what view you were going to look at as far as covering it. What this year has shown even more starkly than ever is the fact that a good majority of our country is locked into our echo chambers. If you were one who was watching conservative media, the Black Lives Matter protest was just one person short of the Bolshevik revolution. I mean, Antifa was probably the cause of everything short of the bubonic plague. If you were watching more progressive or left media, it was like, yeah, I mean, they're talking about a cause, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all the stuff like that. And yeah, well, we got a couple of people who may be, doing something that's illegal or looting, but it's okay. The funniest thing, or not funniest, but the most ironic thing, and I think it was MSNBC, you got Ari Belcher standing, I believe it was in Minneapolis. And in the background, you see a fire, and he's still saying, these mostly calm and peaceful protests. And that was just exploded, especially over conservative media, trying to show that this was, it's a hypocrisy and the whole world was coming to an end. So there's no one easy way to describe how the media covered this.
I totally, go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, are you sure? Okay. I was just going to say from a local standpoint, I would just have to say covering it was a challenge just simply because there's so few of us here in like a local newsroom. There were also like a multiplicity of protests that happened specifically here in Madison County. You had the Black Lives Matter march here in Richmond. You had Back to Blue in Berea, and then you had a Trump rally back here all over Madison County. So there was only, I think, 3 or 4 of us at the time that were able to actually get out, and we had to cover each and every one of those things. So it was making sure that we not only did go to Black Lives Matter, but Berea Backs to Blue, and making sure that it was all equally covered, even though there was only a handful of us to do so. So from a local standpoint, I would like to think we tried to do a good job, but from more of a statewide and national standpoint, I also think, it got all the time it deserved. So it was very, very important to witness, in my opinion.
Let me go back to your original question on the quality of media, one of the biggest dangers, and Randolph hit on this, and Taylor Six did too, is the role of different media in different places. And Taylor was covering intensely local stuff. The challenge is, in any environment, research has consistently shown that you tend to believe that media outlets cover your viewpoint less and the other side's more and more favorably. So not only do we tend to get caught in our own echo chambers of trying to identify different media groups that we want to listen to, we also get caught in the assumption that even media groups that we agree with are not covering that which we agree with as great a fervor as we would like. So it is as much our perception of how the media, of what should be covered, as is what was actually covered. And you can't make a big global statement because there is no the media. There is individual outlets making different choices based on who they perceive their audience is.
And going off that a little bit more is just, for some places, they have different protocols than others. Like here for the Register, just going back to the whole protest example, for the Black Lives Matter, we had a strict word count, or whatever the word count was for that. For the next rally, we had to use the same, close to the same word count, the same amount of photos, the same quality of photos, just to make sure that it was still unbiased in that factor of, okay, you gave this one this much coverage, you need to give this one the equal amount as well.
And I'm going to disagree with that approach. It wasn't your decision to make, Taylor,
No.
but I'm going to disagree with that approach, because it assumes that all sides are equal, all sides have equal value, and that all sides have the exact same story to tell. And the end result is that any number of truths are just a matter of opinion. And I think that is a big concern too, that you've got to have some judgment on what factually based, evidence-based things are true. If the Blue Lives Matter march has 20 people, that doesn't get the same coverage and shouldn't get the same coverage as the 500 people who show up for Black Lives Matter. So I think I get concerned anytime we get lost in equal time for equal sides. It doesn't work like that. I would encourage the Register and everyone to consider, and again, I know it's not everything is your decision, Taylor, to consider what equal coverage means. And I know Randolph will have an opinion on this too.
Well, I was going to say that what we've seen is that people are now trying to, and maybe because it was also an election year, but people are trying to equivocate. And so what we've learned over the last decade plus in news is that straight news doesn't, get people's attention anymore. Everything has to be a WWE. That's why you have, Hannity and Rachel Maddow and everybody. They all, they want that conflict. They want that battle. They want that. And so it can't just be Black Lives Matter. It's got to be Blue Lives Matter, because one side or the other needs to make sure that they get to either equivocate, or when it comes to certain assumptions or certain power structures being challenged, a way to protect that sense of being in control and being in authority. And so, yeah, nobody's denying that Blue Lives Matter. Nobody's denying that all lives matter. But we're in the midst of a situation where we saw, thanks to technology, something that African Americans have been screaming about for decades, if not centuries, that for whatever reason, we seem to bear the brunt of issues when it comes to policing. And when people get hit with that reality, if it threatens the power structure, they've got to figure out a way to either minimize the message or to put it in such broad terms that it gets diluted. And now everybody's saying, oh, yeah, we've got a couple of rogue bad apples, but we had a Black president just a few years ago, so everything's wonderful, kumbaya. And hey, if that's the case, I'm in good shape because I'm the black professor here in our department. So kumbaya, everything is wonderful.
All right. Well, we're going off of that question, for journalists in our country, especially like student journalists, what advice would you give them on how to cover, social justice movements, like the Register covered over the summer, and so did the Eastern Progress?
I will say this, and I'll let my esteemed colleagues go ahead. And I mentioned this before. About a month and a half ago, right after the election, I started putting up postings, basically on my Facebook page, talking about, we need to fight because this election was stolen and Trump was, he was robbed. And what we need to do is, people like Ted Cruz and Josh Howard, right? We need to get up there and we need to, challenge this election. You would be surprised at the number of people who were my friends on Facebook who came back at me. It's like, oh my God, it was fine. Did you go off the deep end? Blah, 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 blah. And I'll admit, politically, I am left of center, but I also realize, as my background as a journalist, I've got to understand what other people are saying, what other sides are thinking, what other people are consuming. So I spend my mornings looking at Fox, MSNBC, CNN, OAN, Newsmax, because I know that I have a lot of students who think differently than I do. And I need to be able to give them a cogent argument. I need to be able to get them to, I need to be able to understand where they're coming from. Because my job is not to get them to think like I do. My job is to get them to think critically, to be able to examine the facts and then determine how we present those facts. But we've come into an age where people can't even agree on facts. That, there's no such thing as alternative facts, but people have accepted that. I can take, if you and I have the same exact facts and have different opinions on them, that's fine. But first, let's agree with the facts. But if I don't know where a good sized number of my students are coming from thinking wise because of the media they consume, I can't be able to get them to think critically because they're going to be coming at it from a totally different area than I am. And if I make it sound like I'm being partisan, then I've lost the battle. So I think for student journalists, they've got to know where all the different voices are coming from when they're trying to put together a cogent story for their viewers, listeners, or readers to be able to understand what's going on.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Okay. So for me, the first thing that I guess in terms of advice I would say is always, you're there for work. And to say that, I mean, you're kind of what Professor Randolph said is you have to remain unbiased in your research and the people that you interview. But being unbiased doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be cold. Another piece of advice I would give is you want to, be present and be listening to the people that you're interviewing and actually care, even though you may not agree, about their viewpoint to be able to show all sides of the story. So just to show compassion and show that you are a human, and while you may not disagree or may not agree, that you don't disrespect them, because as soon as someone gets that vibe, in my experience, they're just going to shut down. And you're definitely not going to get to talk to them at that point. But for sure to obviously be unbiased in your reporting, and who you talk to, and make sure you get all sides, and that whoever you're talking to, that you show them respect and that you show them compassion, although you may disagree with what they're saying.
Taylor, you were a student when we adopted the relentlessly civil motto, weren't you?
Yes. I think that was my last semester. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is incredibly important. I've watched a couple of situations unfold where to be a student journalist, sometimes it means being the levelest head in the room, where you're hearing everyone, where your job is to tell the story of what happened as opposed to taking responsibility for the argument. And you are responsible for presenting the argument, not solving the problem, which was it, or agreeing or disagreeing with anyone, which is somehow always problematic.
Right.
Yeah, because you have people who are trying to make decisions based on facts. And I think, again, I keep coming back to equality or equal time does not mean truth. It means that you've got to find the information and find the story that is, and hear arguments. I don't believe even in the word unbiased, because we all come to anything with our own histories. And I think fairness is the word we want to go with. So instead of trying to worry about equality, I think if we adopt a policy of fairness, then we can still continue to go back to the idea of, okay, what information do we know is true? What do we have substantiated? And if we go off fairness as a model, then we don't have the same problem of saying, well, he said it or she said it, therefore I must present it. No, we're going to be fair with the information. And that's the most important thing.
Jenny, you were just talking about some of the basics of the basic communication model. And as I tell my students, the thing that we have to understand is if you look at the basic linear communication model, you've got the sender, you've got the decoder, you've got the receiver. But in that, when the message is being sent out, we have to worry about noise. What are the things that are influencing how we interpret that? And that comes from everything from a person's race to a person's gender to where they grew up. Are they religious or not religious? And what religion do they follow? There are so many little things, we could all, I have students from Louisville and I joke with them. It's like, well, all Louisvillians think alike. It's like, no, it's like, well, how come you don't know this person? They're from Louisville. What if from a different part of town? Well, you're from Louisville, so all Louisvillians should think alike. All Richmond folks think alike. All New Yorkers think alike. All blacks should think alike. And that's where we have to understand our individual filters and the noise that we have internally in trying to interpret things, and then make sure we're moving out of our comfort zones to hear and see and listen and read things that might be a little foreign to us. And as journalists, our job, again, is to make sure, as you were saying, that it's nice to say, okay, I've got this side, I've got that side, I've got two opposing opinions, boom, I've got my story. Sometimes we have to go a little bit beyond that to say, okay, these are the facts. And now, ladies and gentlemen, these are two opinions on these facts. But let's continue to go a little bit further and see, here's how things have played out. Now you make a decision on how you want to, vote, how you want to shop, how you want to live from what you've seen, heard, or read.
I think one of the most dangerous things I've seen is the dismissal of the pandemic and the misreporting of, and I mean by misreporting is everybody is a reporter now, and a lot of sharing information on social media that in the early days of the pandemic, the spreading of falsehoods. And I think one of the challenges for news organizations has been, okay, not only do I have to anticipate what my readers' viewpoints are, I have to anticipate what wrong information that they've already received and to correct it. How do I correct the bad information that they've gotten? And that's, as Taylor's been talking about, on a small news staff, that can be pretty dang intense. So that's a lot of different roles to play in here. So go ahead.
Yeah, and talking about that too, about fact checking, what you read. What is the best ways for readers and consumers of news to fact check what they're reading and watching, especially when it comes to social media? Trying to fact check what they're consuming.
Take Randolph's and my media and society class and learn media literacy.
That helps, but don't stop on the first Google click. Keep going further and further, and don't go to your favorite websites, your favorite blogs, or your favorite Twitter feeds. We are the most plugged in generation that there is. We have access to more information in a second than anybody in the history of the world, but yet we have become the most insular. And so because of that, it's actually made it easier just to live within what it is that we want to see, read, and hear. And fine, if you're a Britney Spears fan, you just want to be a Britney Spears follower, that's great, no problem, wonderful. But as consumers of news and information, and I tell my students this, I'm 62 years old, in another 20 years, I'm going to be depending on you guys to be taking care of me. So I need you guys to be as well educated and as well versed as possible. When I hear students say, I don't care about the news, I don't care about politics, you better care, because it's going to influence your lives. It's going to influence my life. It's going to make a difference as to, whether or not you're going to be able to take care of your family. A perfect example, what's going on in Texas, because there was such a big push to deregulation, and nobody was watching, to make sure that, well, as we're deregulating, are we going to hold the utility companies and everything responsible? 8 million people, or however many there was, were out of power, and it's still out of clean water, and so many people died. So you can't wait for a disaster to happen before you say, I need to get interested, or it doesn't affect me because I'm so locked into my Fortran or whatever. You've got to be consumers. And it can't just be till you get to my class or Ginny's class and, okay, I got the assignment, let me quickly Google it. Oh, there it is. I got the first line, boom, I've done it. No, dig. Curiosity is still important. That's it.
Taylor, you want to kick in here?
Sure. I kind of just expanding off what Professor Randolph said, digging, getting all the information, going to public meetings, requesting public documents, talking to anybody and everybody, not just kind of sticking in your own echo chamber, looking at, the other side's argument or what they're presenting, and not necessarily having to agree with that, but just making sure that you kind of look at every aspect of it that you can, be it factual, people's personal accounts, things of that nature, and trying to get all the pieces, and just constantly looking, and staying informed.
Hey, Taylor, you're young enough. Do you still remember the
Mm-hmm.
Pokemon song?
No, but I wasn't big into Pokemon.
It's funny how many people could recite that Pokemon song and know all the different Pokemon. But if you ask them, who their 2 U.S. senators are, who their representative is in Congress, it's like, I don't know. And
If you just ask people who the mayor of Richmond is, they have no idea. No clue.
When in the last presidential election, I had a number of students say, well, this doesn't have anything to do with me. And this presidential election, I didn't hear anybody saying that.
Yeah.
It literally took a series of disasters for people to realize that these things have an effect on you. Again, we have a need of information, but at the same time we need it efficiently, and it's kind of hard because we have a glut of information to figure out how to get that information efficiently.
Yeah.
Because there is, I think we have to go back to the knowledge that not all facts are substantiated and not all truths are true. And so what we need to do is figure out, one of the greatest challenges is we aren't having a common ground on information. We have very different understandings of what constitutes scientific validity. Early on in the pandemic, I had a friend who emailed me saying that she had watched this incredible video and what had I seen about it, and we all just needed to take off our mask and become because we have become like sheep, and we needed to embrace herd immunity and all of this. And I sent her 3 sites saying, just debunking what she had heard. And she said, but I heard it from a doctor. I heard it from a medical doctor. And I said, yeah, let's look at that medical doctor's credentials and how many of that doctor's theories have been debunked and all of the contrary evidence. I think we need to be more deliberate in who we trust. It's not just a news source, it's a matter of trusting the sources that the news source uses. What is their credibility? And the more you find credibility within the news sources, the more you're going to have substantial information. But I think at the start, part of adulting is not just making sure you have money in your bank account, but also making sure that you have representatives who actually represent you.
The challenge is, I hear this all the time with students, oh, I don't have time for this, I don't have time for that. It's like, oh, and I can understand maybe as a student, you got all these other classes and things that are going on. But I also think at times it's a cop-out just to allow themselves not to want to think about certain things, not to want to put forth that effort, not to care in some aspects, which is sad because it's then easy when we look at the last election where it's almost a 50-50 split. And for the last 4 years, you've heard fake news, the liberal media, the left is trying to destroy our country, and a president who, retweets all these weird things, the doctor from Louisiana talking about hydroxychloroquine or things that I will say are racist tropes and things like that. Now, again, it goes back to the point I made. I'm filtering some of those things I've read in those Twitter feeds through my noisemaker of who I am as Michael Randolph. But to say that all Blacks think like I do is ridiculous, because there are plenty of African-American supporters for Donald Trump who, if you watched, I remember when the insurrection occurred on the 6th, and I was flipping the channels, I was watching Fox, and I said, leave it to Fox, they found the one Black person marching on the Capitol in favor of Trump. So it's like, hey, but that's why we got to continue to be curious to see what all these different voices are saying.
All right, and talking about the election too, what was your reaction to the large voter turnout in the 2020 election, even during a pandemic? And then for you, Taylor, specifically, how was covering this election different than previous years?
Do I need to start this one? So as an avid voter myself, ever since I got the right to vote at 18, obviously for me personally, seeing the huge turnout, even for Madison County specifically, was really a big deal for me. Just because I think it's the best thing that you can do. Some people throughout Madison County still thought that it was a very disappointing number that we had, but it's a vast improvement from the primary and even the previous election. But that being said, there were so many factors because of coronavirus that made this election more successful, I think, in terms of turnout numbers than previous elections. Obviously, there was extended time to vote. For Madison County, there was 3 separate different ways to vote. There was the difference in precinct and polling stations. So you didn't have to go to a precinct all the way across town. You could go to wherever was nearest you that was open for voting, which is huge. And they're less difficult to staff, so that helps. And then, of course, there was over 100,000 felons in Kentucky alone that had their voting rights restored this year. So all of those things, although coronavirus was just completely took us all by surprise. It helped do all the things that so many people have not been wanting to change for so long. They were forced to do it. And that's not just in polling or election terms. Even like the jail or the criminal justice system was forced to do things differently. But I think definitely helped make a positive impact on things that needed changed. But for me personally, previous elections, there was a lot of moving parts to decide all of those things, and everything was ever changing. There was election meetings all the time to figure out, where was this polling station going to be? Where was this one going to be? Where can we have polling stations? The schools are opening back up. So it was just a lot more in depth than previous elections, because those had been a thing of tradition. Yeah, here's your precinct, here's the deal, go fill it out, you're done. But this one, there was so much that needed to be changed, and in a very small amount of time. So it was constantly keeping up. But I guess in terms of like coronavirus, obviously, events were canceled, like rallies and things. Well, somewhat, some not. But, after McGrath lost to Andy Barr back in 2018, there was a big after gathering, with everyone in the public that could be there, the watch party, and, things like that couldn't really happen this year. We couldn't go to that in person. This year, I sat in a conference room with a box of pizza and just watched it all online. So, it was definitely different in a lot of ways, but I think that, like I said, it forced a lot of positive change for things that officials were hesitant to do for so long.
I saw a difference in attitudes amongst students, particularly African American students. And Randolph, I want to say what I saw, and I want your take on it. In the previous election, in the 2016 election, I had any number of African American students tell me, this doesn't have to do with me. That because there was not a Black person on the ticket, and yes, we had Kamala Harris who was on the ticket this time, but I didn't hear, this has to do with me because there's a Black person on the ticket. It was more a difference in understanding between this election and that election amongst African American students, that this had an effect on them. Randolph, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think, and again, this is just my personal opinion. In 2016, I should say, we had two candidates that really didn't inspire people, and my takeaway from the last two elections is that pollsters are really going to have to do a deep dive to figure out what happened. They didn't expect Trump to win the first time and expected him to get trounced this second time, and neither one of those things happened. In 2016, a lot of Black friends that I knew, those who voted, they voted for Hillary, but they kind of like held their nose about it. And others like, she's going to win anyway. So they stayed home. They didn't have the same motivation they did for Barack Obama. They seem to be more energized. And I'm not sure, how much of that was just their dislike for Donald, or, what they saw going on with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the other incidents that happened leading up to the election, and COVID. It was just such a gumbo of stuff going on that makes this year going to be interesting to look back over, or the next decade. They're going to be studying 2020 for years before we can really figure out what happened. But yeah, there was definitely more motivation, stuff I haven't seen in decades, as far as young Black students and African Americans in general being energized about this particular election. We got out of our middle class comfort zone to say something needs to be done.
Yeah, and talking about the election too, the Eastern Progress, student news outlets all across the country as well, were hard at work covering the election. So why is student journalism so important, especially when it comes to, reporting on huge things like an election?
All right, I'm going to give you the vocational answer. It's important because you guys want to get a job. And if you're not doing it right, it's going to affect your future. And it's also going to affect us as faculty, because we'll get terrible reputations like, hey, don't go to EKU. They stink about, helping us know what we have to know and do what we have to do so we can be successful. And it's important for student journalists to know that when they step out of here, they're going to be torn between a whole bunch of different things and attitudes and issues that come not from their skills, what the hierarchy of who they work for expect from them. Taylor talked about how, okay, they do certain word counts to make sure stories are balanced between, when you're covering the same general topic. But I mean, I've played for my students over and over again in the last few years that Mashable that came down from Sinclair for all its TV anchors to read across the country, all reading the same script in Boise, in Lexington, in Cincinnati, in New York. These are the challenges that you're going to have to face, which may make you question your own ethics, which may make you have to make a hard decision. Can I do this and live with myself? Am I in this for a paycheck? Am I in this to really try to make a difference and do what we journalists are supposed to do? We're supposed to, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable to get people to think. So that's my coming off my platform now.
Two things, and I'm going to pass it to Taylor Six. One is universities are small cities. They're microcosms, and we need to have a form of analysis, a form of information, a form of watchdog, all of those things in any city. And so having it within the university is very important. That's thing one. Thing two is some of the best reporting going on in the country right now is happening on university campuses. And that is why we're seeing lots of student journalists get recognized. At the same time, we're having things come to us. And I want Taylor Six to talk about the Trump rally, which happened in 2018. That had a big impact, and Taylor was in the center of covering it. And I really think it set her up for the things that happened next in her career, and reporting on that experience. Taylor?
Yeah, so to kind of answer the first question, it's a mashup between both you and Professor Randolph. Obviously, student journalism is important just to learn. If you do take it seriously and you do want to get into that field, you need to be a responsible student journalist first. And then that being said, that goes kind of into what you said, Professor Whitehouse, of holding these small cities accountable. And from my standpoint, the Progress has helped me hugely with this. I'm doing a ton of different things, and as our student journalist with school, but I can't always get to every EKU thing, or Destiny can't always get to every EKU thing. So I, and largely the county as a whole, rely on those that are there at the Progress or whichever university it is to be the gatekeeper and be the watchdog, and then pass that on to, other partners or other journalists to know. So at the end of the day, while it is always great to break a story, it's also more important to me personally at the end of the day to just have the information out there for people to know. But in terms of the Trump rally, oh my, so that was an event that definitely set me up for my career, and it happened so perfectly because it was at the tail end of when I was graduating. So that was in October and I was graduating in December. So it was kind of putting all of the things that I had learned in my 4 years to the test that very day. And then using that as kind of, okay, this is what I learned. Here's how I executed it. Here's what I'm prepared to do for you here at the Richmond Register with all this being displayed. But I mean, I had to do video recording. I had to write the story while I was, listening. I was interviewing people at the same time, live tweeting, setting up the equipment, trying not to get trampled. Just there's so many different things that go into just not even being scared. So, and then, of course, meeting the deadline. So there was just so many things that went into that day specifically. And it was all, because of everything that I had learned, that I was able to do that and then present it just a few weeks after to be able to get a job and say, hey, I just did this, a sitting president's never come here. This was huge. I can handle the pressure. So it definitely had a big hand in my career personally. It was and I almost wasn't able to make it. So that's a big deal. So yeah, it's a big thing.
But I think I saw you on that day go from I don't think I am emotionally capable of doing this and managing the crowds to, oh my goodness, I can do this, and I know that because I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's still my battle to this day.
It's literally, you lived it at that moment, and that's the moment when you became a professional journalist. And it was wonderful to watch it happen. And Zach is nodding because Zach was there too. Zach had the same moment when we covered the Black Lives Matter protest.
Yep.
Zach, talk a little bit about that, on how covering the Black Lives Matter protest this summer.
Yeah, it was a very interesting moment. As a student journalist, you don't always expect, you got your basic sports and news stories and stuff, but to go out in the community to interact with people was just pretty cool, to get their stories and to, listen to what they had to say. And as well as there was EKU students there was athletes, coaches. So a lot of people were there. The president was there, EKU president. So we were able to talk with people, get their stories, and really builds your resume pretty much. It builds your confidence to get out there outside your comfort zone, because not every day you're going to be covering a march through downtown Richmond. So it really builds your confidence as a journalist to kind of step up and rise to the moment. We had that window of time to do interviews, get videos, pictures, and then meet the deadline, write stories. So it was a very cool moment, and especially with the Trump rally too. I was covering the counter protesters for most of the day, which was interesting to see the two sides of the situation of the rally. They were all pretty nice. Everybody was respectful of the journalists, which was great. Because I feel like a lot of journalists fear, stuff that happened like at the Capitol, where journalists were getting, their equipment ruined and getting, kind of bullied pretty much. So being there though, and seeing that from a student perspective, we didn't have any problems, which was great. And to just, tell their stories was a neat experience. Probably once in a lifetime experience, especially for a sitting president to come to our university. So that was a great time.
And kind of just going off that a little bit from unsolicited advice, I guess, talking about, the community being out there and engaging with the community. I can't say enough how important of a tool that is to be involved in your community. Where I've been in Richmond, covering Richmond and Madison County and Berea, a lot of the same people, you see a lot of the same people. So even like at the Black Lives Matter rally, I was able to go up to the mayor and go up to, the city officials that I know, and they'd say, hey, I know this person that's here, that they were here during the Jim Crow era, and, they're here again today. Would you want to talk to them? Well, yeah, heck yeah, I want to talk to them. So, because I have that connection with those people, and they know others, and they can put me into touch with them. So I got the opportunity to interview someone that I never would have been able to pick out in a crowd and say, oh, you were here, during Jim Crow, and now you're here again during this time doing the same exact thing. Tell me what that's like. So it's always good to, be involved and, keep everybody kind of within arm's reach and to make friends, even though at the end of the day, sometimes you might be taking them off when it comes time to write a story about their agency. But it always helps to know people and have a super wide network. So that way, whenever you're writing a story, whatever it is, you can say, oh, I know this person, I can get into contact with them, and boom, you're done. So that is always something that's something that's helped me personally throughout my short career. So
And what's going on is that you guys are unfortunately flying in the face of what our technology has wrought, because we've gotten to the point where we'll text somebody or email somebody, and if they don't get back, oh, we tried. It's like the idea of actually using your phone as a phone to call somebody, or God forbid, you want me to actually go to their office where they work to sit and actually see them face to face. But I mean, that's how journalism has been done for years. And that's how the stories get out there, is that people, after you do it, it's boots on the ground, doing what you got to do. And we can't allow the comfort of having, computers and smartphones take away from the fact that it takes effort to do a story, to research a story, and it takes effort then on our part as readers and consumers to say, okay, that's interesting. Let me go back and dig a little bit more to see where they're getting this information from. Is it accurate? Are they slanting it, like taking a quote out of context? All these little things like that are available for us. But it still boils down to you and Zach and everybody else doing the legwork and making it happen.
it's a lot of legwork.
Yeah, that's very true. There's nothing like a good old face-to-face interview. That's always the best to build that connection with people, that rapport, and then that helps you in the long run too, because then they might come to you with stories or story ideas, or they'll trust you enough to let you know what's going on. So it's always
Yeah, there's also nothing like seeing someone's face when you do just show up at their office after they've ignored you in every possible way, and you're just like, yes, I need you to speak with me now.
Yeah, there's no Tinder for good journalism. You just can't swipe left and boom, there's my story.
Oh, that would be awesome.
That is good stuff. All right, so let's move on here. Some other questions. So we've seen people say the First Amendment rights are under attack by big tech, kind of going along with the election stuff too, and that they're victims of the, quote unquote, cancel culture. So do you believe this to be so? And then how you seen this play out? Mm-hmm.
I'm jumping in. First and foremost, and my law students know where I'm about to go. The First Amendment starts with the words Congress. Congress shall make no law. It does not start with no one shall ever tell me not to say something. So the first thing to remember with the First Amendment, it's about government controlling speech. And that the ultimate thing, though, that government is going to stop you from doing, this is the one consistent thing that the First Amendment does not protect, and that is calling for violence. So you cannot call for violence. It doesn't matter right wing, left wing, up or down. You cannot call for violence and not expect there to be government reaction. At the same time, corporations, such as those that own social media companies, have their own First Amendment rights, and they are not compelled to give you a voice. They've built their platform. Your existence on that platform is their choice. So Twitter's decision to cancel Trump was tied to a couple of things, starting with the fact that he violated their policies. But even if Twitter had been owned by the government. Even if social media were a public entity, we would have a lot of people being taken out because they're calling for violence. And that is simply not allowed under, whether it's a government control, and corporations can choose not to participate in that. In addition, the other way to consider how control is made is by the pocketbook. You have news organizations who have gained power because they have given rise to a voice that people want to hear, whether it's based on factual information or not. Counter to that, though, is the idea, the other thing that you can do if you don't like what someone is saying, and that is sue them for libel because they're spreading false information and false information about you. So we have part of cancel culture right now is, oh, by the way, we're not going to let you speak if you're going to provide false information that is harmful. So on one hand, we have a low level of tolerance for difference. On the other hand, we do have safeguards in place for a reason. I pass the ball to my colleagues.
It will be interesting to watch to see what happens with this $2 billion lawsuit against Fox from, was it Dominion? Was that the voting machine company? I admit that I come down somewhere in the middle on both of these things, in the sense that, yeah, there's no excuse for calling for violence, but I don't also want things in the dark. You need stuff to come out in the light in order to be able to expose it. Unfortunately, there's still, I tell my students, last year we celebrated the 50th anniversary of what? It's like, oh, well, what? You know, the landing on the moon. But there's still millions of people who say, hey, that didn't happen. And I'll tell them, okay, you know what? I can't prove it happened either. You know, can I prove that there wasn't massive election fraud? No, I'm not going to go up and swear it on a Bible, but I believe I've checked enough resources and facts to say it is highly unlikely that it happened. My biggest challenge with this quote unquote term cancel culture is that it seems that it's the loudest voices that are the ones that scream, we don't want this, we don't want that. You know, Ann Coulter is a conservative, you know, female commentator who has an opinion that's different than mine. But should she be allowed to speak on a university campus to give her thoughts and ideas? Because she's not calling for revolution, she's not calling for violence, but she speaks from a conservative line of view. But when you get enough people screaming on the progressive side, we don't want her, and then they uninvite her, that is where I think the danger comes in, that we can't have discussions with people who view things politically different than us. And we're not talking about people who are racist or anything like that. We're talking about people who have a particular political slant and a particular view of how the world runs. That is the danger for me of this new term cancel culture.
And tied to that is the assumption that if someone believes differently than I do, then either A, they're attacking me, or no, I'm presenting a different opinion than you are, and B, you don't have the right to exist. So it's I think that part of cancel culture is problematic. If we keep going back to the relentlessly civil idea where you can have a civilized conversation, I think that is important.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of just like what you said, Professor Whitehouse, in terms of like the big tech, you know, Twitter, Facebook, those are all private companies. People are quick to throw out, oh, the First Amendment, but do they actually understand what that says? Do they actually understand what it really means in the First Amendment? There's a quote, and I can't remember exactly what it is or who it's by, but it says, you know, while it is a right that's guaranteed by you or to you, it's not an excuse to give to others to widen your agenda. But I mean, it kind of contributes, I guess, cancel culture to you're contributing to your own echo chamber, I guess, in my opinion. You know, the easier that you're able to cut people off from things that you don't necessarily agree with, that just is kind of feeding back into your echo chamber of this is what I do believe. So it just kind of keeps the cycle going of just non-truth sometimes.
I mentioned last week, and I got a little, how I like to poke the bear every now and then. So I talked about the passing of a person who, like him or not, was a media icon who passed away last week, and that's Rush Limbaugh. The modern conservative movement may have begun 50 years ago with William F. Buckley, and then got a big boost with Senator what's his name, who was out in Arizona. Quickly, Ginny, who was it? Who ran against Johnson and got beat?
Who are you talking about? McCain?
No. Before McCain, the senator in '64 who ran against Johnson and lost.
Oh, him. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't remember his name now.
Uh-huh.
And then and then Reagan came along to take up the mantle. But like it or not, Rush Limbaugh made conservatism so popular and so pervasive. And some people would say he saved AM radio, that you can't ignore who he was and what he did. But then think about a little over 15 years ago when he was hired by ESPN because they couldn't ignore him to do the Sunday morning football show. And when he made some comments that were controversial about then Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Donovan McNabb, he left ESPN. And a lot of people screaming, that's unfair. It's a violation of First Amendment rights. No, it's not. Again, as Ginny said, Congress should not enact anything that's going to restrict freedom of speech. ESPN has a right to hire and fire anybody they want. You have a right to say anything you want, but doesn't necessarily mean that me as an employer has to accept that because I'm protecting your First Amendment rights. No, as a professor, I have some academic freedom, but the university still has the right to fire me if I violate policy or I don't think I'm representing the university in a fair way. So this is where we, going back to the issue of question of cancel culture. Cancel culture can't mean that because I don't like you or like what you say, your words are invalid or you're invalid, as Ginny was saying. It's like, no, I don't have to accept what you say, but I can still, at least respect you as a human being. What's that old saying? I may not agree with,
what you have to say, but I'll die for your right to say it.
Amen. Go ahead with your bad self.
It's one to live by.
All right, that's good stuff. And going off that a little bit, over past several years, people have kind of expressed their loss in faith in the media, but also just journalism and stuff. So students moving into the field, how can they rebuild that trust? At the local level, but also if they go higher up, like talk about ESPN and higher up, how could journalists that are future journalists, how can they rebuild that trust in consumers and people?
I'll go ahead and jump in, I guess. But before I kind of get to what we can do as responsible journalists, I'm gonna throw it out there to readers too and say there has to be some level of responsible readership in light of kind of everything that's going on. There's so much information out there now, true, false, right, left. It's kind of your job as a reader to read it and look over, everything and collectively think, okay, what do I believe? What do I think is factual? And kind of go from there with how you proceed with your opinion or whatever it is. But in terms of journalism, obviously, it starts with learning everything that you can at school, ethics, media law, no matter how hard it may be at that time. And just your responsible ways of writing, and fact checking and everything that you need to do. And as a journalist, I like to read other people's articles and think, okay, what else would I have liked to have known from this? What questions are missing from this article that I, as a reader, want to know, as it pertains to this topic? What do I feel is missing from this? And I try to go through and read my things that I write and think, okay, did I miss anything? Are there any questions that I still should have asked that are crucial to perhaps someone forming an opinion about whatever it is I'm discussing at that time? So it's definitely a partnership of responsible writing and responsible reading. But I think once you step back, for me personally, once I step back and think, okay, as a reader, what do I think of this? That kind of helps me as a journalist to say, oh, what do I need to add to this or to make it better?
As I tell my students, they got to use that thing called the Google machine in order to. And I quickly did the Google machine. Barry Goldwater. I can't believe I forgot Barry Goldwater's name, the senator from Arizona, who got trounced in '64. It goes back to something I said at the beginning. I don't know what happened or what it is, but we no longer embrace the truth. We no longer embrace the facts. And until we can get back to a society that allows us to say, I may not like what the facts are telling me, but I can't argue with it, then it's going to be that much more of a challenge for us journalists, or for you journalists, because I'm retired from the field right now. But it's like, the old line is, don't confuse me with facts. Well, that's what people are. We've gotten to that point now where it's like, it has nothing to do with the movie, but the inconvenient truth is what people don't want to deal with. And until we can figure out a way for us all to say, I may not like what the facts are telling me, but it's a fact, then we're in trouble. Again, I have no people taking the same facts and coming up with different perspectives and opinions on them. But until we can agree these are the facts, then it's going to make your job that much tougher, because you're going to be, if your story seems too much on the left, you're going to be considered the liberal media and a hypocrite and an order of fake news. And then if you're going to be too much on the right, it's like, oh, you're a fascist. You're supporting the suppression of people of color, and you're coming from your white privilege. We've learned how to point so many fingers at all these different things that divide us that it makes it easy to ignore. Here's what the facts say. It's like, Taylor, are you pregnant?
No, thankfully no.
There you go. That's a yes or no answer. There's no like in between. Well, you can't be a little pregnant. Either you are or you ain't. So, facts are facts, but no, we like, maybe there's just something in between. And until we get to that point, we're in trouble. Or you're going to have, not in trouble, but you're going to have a harder job, you and Zach, doing your job.
Randolph, never ask a woman if she's pregnant, even for a rhetorical device.
Hey, I'm Randolph. Since when have, foot and mouth disease has always been my issue, so I don't worry about that. At this juncture, I'm too old.
I'll let Zach go ahead.
Should I have asked Zach? Zach, are you pregnant? There you go.
Oh, Randolph. I just want to give a reminder to people on the Zoom, if you got any questions, put it in the chat and we'll be sure to ask them. I just got a couple more right here. So, looking at the First Amendment overall, how can a community, and especially, since we're talking to students right now, how can students use their collective voices to enact positive change?
Okay. It's the two things. One is when you see information that is incorrect and is being spread by your friends, call them out on it. I think you have to be the voice. Every single person has to be the voice who says, your facts are not valid. You can't expect other people, because if you have a relationship with someone, they're more likely to believe you. So I think that's the biggest place to start as far as individuals, is to, first of all, embrace truth and call people out when they're spreading falsehoods. And second, embrace civility. That as you don't have to belittle someone to tell them that they're wrong.
The backdrop behind Ginny says wisdom and knowledge. And I tell my students, just because I stand in front of you, you still need to question the knowledge. You still need to question the assumptions. Because as fair as I want to be in my classrooms, again, I'm still coming from the perspective of who I am and everything that I've lived in my life. And so there's always going to be some issues of bias that I have to be careful of. But either way, we can't take everything we see and hear on face value unless I'm watching a James Bond movie. Then it's like, okay, cool. I know at the end he's going to win. So that's the only thing I can guarantee. So question the knowledge, question the information, and that helps you move forward. And then you can lead somebody else, as Ginny's saying, when you see that they're doing something or saying something or believing something that may not be on the up and up.
Now keep in mind, I just called Randolph out for saying something inappropriate. Now, I hope, first of all, Randolph and I have a relationship. We're friends, we're colleagues, and I said, Randolph, you shouldn't have done that. And we're still friends and colleagues, at least I hope we are. And so there is a way to do this so that there is still civility. And so be the model of truth and civility.
All of those things, yes, for me, but also voting. Like I said earlier, a huge person, advocate for voting. I know a lot of people argue it doesn't matter, it won't affect me, but it is one small way, it is one right that you have. People fought and died for this right, so I'm just a huge proponent for voting. But even little things that from a local standpoint that have helped me, write into your local paper if there's something going on that you think is not right or that you think should be looked into. Write a letter to the editor. I can't tell you how many anonymous letters I've gotten that have said, something weird's going on at the jail or something weird's going on at the health department. Look into this. And there was. So, it just takes a little bit of action on anyone's part to help, make a difference, be it positive or perhaps a little negative that leads to a positive after a while. So yeah, but definitely voting. Always vote.
And again, don't be afraid of profiles and courage. I think one of the most indelible scenes that in my lifetime of a profile and courage, even if it, had a negative effect on the person, was, wow, 16 years ago when President Obama was running against then Senator McCain. Senator McCain was at a rally and he was talking with people, and this one woman said, well, I can't trust Obama. He's a Muslim, he's all these different things. It's like, and McCain could have very said, well, and he could have very just said nothing, could just let that pass and go on. But no, he took the time to go and say, no, ma'am, he's a good American. He's just somebody who I disagree with. we've got to be able to get back to the point where we can say, Taylor's a good American. I just disagree with her. Zach is a good American. I just disagree with her. I have an R, she has a D behind my name. That does not mean that she's the devil or he's the devil because we don't vote the same way. But that is how we start to fix the divides in us, because we have more in common that separate us. But because we've been watching a media that loves WWE more than the truth, we want a good fight rather than, understanding what the storyline is.
That's your soundbite for the day. That was excellent.
All right, we got a question from Cole on the chat. This is for Professor Whitehouse. You mentioned that you believe that the size of the movement should dictate the coverage that it receives. Does that not violate the role of the marketplace of ideas in journalism?
Oh, I don't mean that the size of the movement dictates the coverage. It's that the size is, you can't say, well, we have to give everyone with a different opinion equal time. It means that if you have 500 people covering at a rally, you don't necessarily have to give that 500 person rally the same physical space as you give a rally with 20 people. That's what I was meaning. And I'm going to look up really quick. I asked the marketplace, that very marketplace of ideas question, to Deggans, our guest speaker from last week, and who was in our Chautauqua. And I said, let's see, what was my question exactly? Is the marketplace of ideas premise possible in the current media market? And he said, it is definitely possible to debate something like the existence of systematic racism in American society. But if you press that debate by spreading the lie that George Floyd died by a drug overdose and Black Lives Matter's protests are funded by and organized by Antifa, that lie is echoed by an enormously profitable, conservative-oriented cable TV news channel, then the marketplace is poisoned. So what I'm doing is coming back with two different answers there. One is you've got to have an understanding of what the facts are. And second, that just because one person has an idea that is different from another person, that doesn't mean both ideas need equal time. Thanks, Cole.
I'll play devil's advocate and I'll say, okay, well, of course you're, that's right. It's like people say, well, that's not fair because now you're canceling the culture and now you're censoring, valuable information. And, I know hydroxychloroquine works, and because my cousin's uncle's brother's son took it and got better. So there.
And that's where we go back to, what's your factual basis? And is there equal? Does that mean all facts get equal time or all opinions get equal time? The ones that are factually based should be recognized as part of a healthy debate, but that doesn't mean everything gets equal time. I want to hear Taylor's viewpoint on this.
I mean, I just, it's kind of ingrained in me now. Not necessarily that every viewpoint deserves equal time, but just, to be fair, just because and I know once I say this, I'll probably start a whole nother thing. We get a lot of ridicule from readers. They find that stuff and they just latch on to whatever they can find. And so it's kind of just, and it's more so in terms of election writing, like candidacy coverage of, this person's running for commissioner, they have a 400 word count. This person is running for commissioner, they have a 400 word count. So I'm not to say that that's how you approach it in every aspect of whatever it is you're covering. But in some aspects we do follow that. and a lot of it, you know, it kind of goes back to journalist responsibility. You're kind of the barometer of what goes and what stays. I mean, for any interview, you can get a ton of information and then you pick out all the quotes that you want to use, but you're still responsible for telling the story accurately, even though you don't use everything that they said. You want to pick out the pieces that are moving and powerful, but still also hold weight and factualism and what the point you're trying to get across. So it's
about fairness.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I mean,
no, you're fine.
but that is where, unfortunately, those who want to criticize journalists, and especially, all right, because guys, you know, I lean left. So when I hear the right screaming, well, you know, you guys are just cherry picking stuff to make yourself look good, but that happens on both sides. Everybody's going to take the one snippet of a line or a quote in order to prove their point. And that's where, as journalists, you know, you guys have the hardest job, is how do you make sure that what you are saying is fair and accurate? Because no matter what, somebody's still going to be upset saying, ooh, you're picking sides.
Every time.
You may lose me for a quick second as I'm moving out of my classroom and into the elevator.
You're good. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up around here. If anybody else has any questions, so I think we're all good. Appreciate all the panelists being here and everybody watching. This video will be posted on our YouTube channel, so if you want to rewatch it there, you can, or share it with your friends. So thank you guys for joining me, and have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Good to see you all.
See you. Great job, Taylor.
Bye, guys.